So, Node for novices. Fun stuff. So what is Node? Well, according to the Node.js documentation, Node is a JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine, uses an event-driven, non-blocking I/O model that makes it lightweight and efficient. It includes a package ecosystem. NPM is the largest ecosystem of open source libraries in the world. And if you're a novice, you understand maybe the ins and the ons and the that's and the makes, and you don't understand a whole lot of the rest of that. So what does it really mean? For novice purposes, it is a standalone runtime environment for JavaScript. And what does that mean? Well, it means it's really not geared for browsers. It's geared for hardware, for servers, for your laptop. If you do robots, for the robots. It uses, as kind of the baseline environment, the same environment that Google Chrome does, which is known as V8. So you'll see references to V8. But it also bundles additional libraries for things like file handling on your local machine. Things that make Node particularly well suited for servers. It does also have a great open source ecosystem of other modules, and we're going to be looking at one of those tonight and looking at a little bit of the wraparound for that. So for a novice, this is a good set of features for you to focus on. Node has a lot more to offer. When you're first starting, these are kind of the things you should focus on for Node. How are we going to play with Node tonight? Because this is really about being as hands-on as possible. And I have to apologize up front because I'm going to be doing a lot more presentation than I like early on. But we are going to play with it tonight. If you already have Node and an IDE or a text editor installed, I'm going to strongly suggest that you use that instead. If you do not have one of those, go ahead, head over to codeanywhere.com, sign up for an account. It's going to prompt you to create a new project. You can name it whatever you want to. I'm going to explore this environment. Projects are always purple people eater. And it's going to ask if you want to add a new connection. You will want to add a new connection. And go ahead and do Node.js. I've used Ubuntu. It really shouldn't matter. But if you're worried about consistency, that'll help with consistency. Any questions so far? Shoot. You talk to Node? Yes.
So you could write JavaScript scripts
that run locally that don't ever touch a browser.
Right.
Yes. 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 Yeah.
You're typically using Node because you need the browser to talk to Node?
No, you're using Node to run JavaScript in an environment other than the browser. The most common case of which is as a web server. That provides the backend for websites.
Okay.
Does that make sense to most people?
So like in C# or
yes.
Java, in the backend, you're going to use Node.
Correct. Okay. Correct. Yep. Any other questions at this point? Okay. I'm going to do a quick Code Anywhere tour, and I'm probably going to be bouncing back and forth between this tab and the other tab. Just to make sure I cover the things that I want to. So purple people, eater, Node.js, Ubuntu, and I go ahead and create my space. So it's creating this container now. You'll notice that this looks an awful lot like a standard IDE. I'm going to switch it over to columns 2 in a second. Come on. Let's see if I can do this without that. Probably not. Yes. OK. So I can use on a Mac Option X to hide and show my files. Right now it's spinning everything up, so I don't have any files to show you. I prefer not to have the minimap on because it's going to kind of get in the way. So if you come up to View, you can deselect minimap, and it won't get in your way either. We are going to be spending a lot of time in the terminal environment, which is the SSH terminal. It comes up by default. if you can see this little icon up here, that's telling you that that's a terminal. That's a pretty standard icon for a terminal or a command line. If you lose this, you can right-click on your connection here, and you will see an SSH terminal option, and you can get another SSH terminal to work in. So don't be afraid if you lose it. When you want to come back to your project, you're going to need to come up to your dashboard. Your dashboard's going to open it up in another tab, and then you go to projects, and you can see your projects. There is a distraction-free mode. I'm going to be trying to switch over to this because there's not enough screen real estate as it is. Basically, that hides everything up top like so. When I am in that mode, I will frequently need to create a new file that is on a Mac. You use a Control-N in this environment. Any questions about keyboard shortcuts? OK. So the first thing that we're going to do in your new project is we are going to initialize a local repository. There are two ways to do this typically. The first one, the one up top, is npm init. If you do that, it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. For our purposes, those answers really aren't all that important, so you can kind of bypass all those questions by just doing npm init --yes. It's going to use all of the default values that it has for that. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce over here. I'm going to do an npm init --yes, and I'm going to run that. I will bump up the font. This is going to get fun in a little bit. OK. So what this is showing me is it says that we have now created a file, and these are the properties that we have assigned to it. And we're going to look at that file in a moment. Particularly relevant is when you get to the point that those questions matter to you, you can find documentation on the NPM site about what the different values are for answering those questions. So I've got a link there. I will make this presentation available after this presentation tonight. So what we just saw goes into a file called the package.json. This includes relevant metadata about your project, including other projects that are known as modules that your project depends on. So if I bounce over here, I can't see my package.json yet. I need to run a refresh. There's my package.json. I'm going to take a look at that, and you'll see that that's exactly what I had there before. So this is my package.json. This is just a basic JavaScript object. I've got key values. I've got a name for my project, a version for it. If I'd given it a description, that type of information. We'll look at a little bit of this. You'll see a lot more about it at next month's presentation. Node modules. We're going to get in a moment a directory called node modules. I'm going to come back to that when I have it up there and running. A module that you may be interested in installing is Yarn. When you install it, and if none of this looks familiar, that's OK. You will actually understand this line in about 10 minutes. You can run npm install yarn -- global. And Yarn is kind of an alternative to npm, which we're going to go over. So don't do this, just follow along. I'm trying to demonstrate some things that may come in handy. So I'm going to take this npm install learn you node.
Is Yarn and Node npm conflict with each other?
Yes and no. So they augment each other, but within an individual project, you should choose one or the other for running commands. Yes. They duplicate a lot of functionality, and they may step on each other's foot if you use them in the same project. So if you start using one, continue using that for the project. So I am going to run from my command line npm install learn you node, and this is going to install. Fun stuff here. So out of curiosity, how many people consider themselves novices at this point? OK. Pre-novice. Excellent. Love it. So essentially what's happening is it's pulling down individual packages. It's telling me things like packages that have been deprecated, things that have security violations. It's more verbose than normal. It's coming. It's coming.
So did you want us to do this?
Nope, don't do this one. We're going to do something very similar, but I want to explain some key characteristics first.
So, I guess that's why Express comes into play. It does a lot for you to work with Node.
It augments some functionality that Node has in a way that a lot of people find useful.
Would it be the equivalent of a jQuery to JavaScript then?
Yeah, I'd probably go more. Well, yeah, that's a good analogy. And I did not expect this to take this long. I apologize. OK, there we go. So you'll notice down here that it told me that it's installed 736 packages. Well, what does that exactly mean? So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to refresh this again. And now you'll see that I have this node modules directory. And if I look in here, you'll notice that I have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of directories. Every one of these is a node module that's been installed. And if I bounce back over to my package JSON, you'll note, not my lock, my JSON. You should refresh also. Go away. I'm not sure why it is. Oh, that's why. You'll notice that I've got a new dependencies down here, and it only lists one thing here. So what's happened is I've installed Learn You Node as a dependency. But when it went to install, it had its own package JSON. And so when Node was installing everything, and I've got just enough lag that I am clicking on the wrong things. I apologize. It loaded its own package JSON, and in here it has dependencies. Anyway, we've got contributors also. It's got dependencies, and so those got installed, and then they have their own package JSON, which have dependencies. So basically what NPM has done in this case is it has said, get all the different dependencies that I need to run Learn You Node as a package. Any questions about that? Pretty simple, high-level concept. OK, so this command is actually a combination of different commands. So npm is a command line program. And it takes in this case, it's taking two parameters. One is the install, one is Learn You Node. So we run npm. It sees the first parameter, which is install. It says, hey, this is one of my methods. This method needs a module to install. Oh, there's the module that we're going to install. So that's what's going on with that npm install Learn You Node. If you don't provide that Learn You Node, you just run npm install, and you have a package JSON that has dependencies, it's actually just going to grab all those dependencies for you. So that's a high level of the way the different packages work. Any questions? OK. We have this thing called local bin. And in this case, again, don't run this. You'll notice that I've got node right here. And then I've got this path right here. So if I run this in my terminal right now, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to clear you out. I get this pretty little menu. Well, what's happening? I'm going to actually exit out of there. We're going to look at that. If I press my up arrow in the terminal, I get the last command that I ran. So you'll notice that we have our node modules here. And in that, we have our Learn You Node. Go away. Go away. And in there, we have a bin. Here's my bin. And then in here, I have another Learn You Node. And this is actually a program that Node will run. And that's what's generating the menu that you just saw. that said, so I just ran this program from my command line. That long string right there is kind of onerous to type, to figure out what path. It is dependent on your current position. So if I was in a directory other than my Purple People Eater project, the second it tried to find the node modules, it would find node modules for whatever project I was in, not for the one that I'm currently using. So when it got down to learn new node, it probably wouldn't find it. So it's a relative path. All these things make it kind of a pain to work with. So there's a slightly better way. Before I get to that, REPLs. So I can actually run just node from my command line. And previously, when I was typing in commands, I had a $sign. That let me know that I was in my base command line or my terminal, in this case bash, most likely. This little sideways caret, that tells me that I'm in my REPL. And now I can type JavaScript just like I would anywhere else. So 2 + 2 = 4, et cetera, et cetera. So you can actually just pull up Node in your terminal and start typing your JavaScript and test your JavaScript just like you would in a console in a browser. To get out of here on Mac, it is Control-C, done twice. And I'm back to my regular bash prompt with my $sign. Any questions? Super simple stuff. OK. OK. So this should look kind of familiar because I just did it. Node, and then I dig down to my learn new node. This package JSON should sound familiar at this point. You'll notice the title of the slide is scripts. And if you look in a package JSON file, you will see a scripts word here. I'm going to take this teach me node. I'm going to bounce over to our package JSON. It keeps wanting to drop me into package lock. And you'll notice that I have a scripts already in here with test. I am going to paste my teach me node in there, and I'm going to save that. And now I can actually run this one of 3 ways, depending on whether I'm using npm or yarn. If I'm using npm, which I am, I'm going to run this npm run teach me node. So I'm going to bounce over. I'm going to run that. And it's going to spin up. And there's that beautiful blue menu from this particular package. I just made a shortcut. I can shortcut any script that I want to in a similar fashion. So what's the difference between the npm, the yarn, and the yarn? So the npm run and the yarn run are fairly equivalent. Again, if you use one for your project, use it consistently for your project. But you may notice that I have a run on the first yarn one. I don't have it on the second one. So you'll notice that I created a script of my own making. That is a custom script for this particular npm project. I can create as many of those as I want. If I'm using npm, I have to run npm run. So again, npm is the program that I'm running from my command line. npm has a method on it called run. Run takes one of those script names, and it says, let me go do that script for you. Yarn has something very comparable. But Yarn also has some fallbacks. So if there is not already a command line program on your system with that name, it will actually check your local scripts to see if that exists. So you can get away without the run if you're using Yarn, and that's a unique script name. That said, there are a whole bunch of standard scripts that you will see and use very, very often. Test, start, stop are some very common ones. And in this case, these are actually set up by Node and npm. You can hit the npm documentation to see the full list of them. They do not require run for either npm or yarn. Any questions? Yes. Thank you. It's Learn You Node. So I named my script teach me mode, teach me Node, because honestly, if you saw scripts, Learn You Node, Node modules, Learn You Node, then Learn You Node, the Learn You Nodes get really confusing really fast. So, okay. That said, this is the preferred way to install this particular project. So I'm going to go ahead and bounce over. I'm going to get that started. I will explain that momentarily. So I'm going to encourage all of you that want to follow along, go ahead and do npm install learn you node -- global. I'm going to bounce back to the slide. It is on the slide. Don't go away. So what's the difference between having that -- global and not having it? Essentially, the -- global says, make this available everywhere on my computer. And so frequently, I can't think of a case where this isn't true, but I'm sure there are. Global packages include some type of program that you will run from your command line. So just like I can run this npm program, these global packages frequently install some type of program that you can run from anywhere on your machine. Okay? So in this case, once it's installed, you will be able to type on your command line in whatever directory you're in, learn you node, and you'll see that pretty blue menu. That make sense? Any questions? Y'all are really quiet. Okay. If I hear snoring, I'll be upset.
It still doesn't do the folder for Learn You Node, right?
No, it actually goes into a global npm. Yep. Yep.
So you could go find it somewhere else on a computer.
Yes.
Somewhere it's going to
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
When I installed it, it gave me like a whole bunch of warning notices that debugs when all these files have low vulnerability or something.
Yep. Yeah. So I bet you if I bounce back over, we should see something similar. I don't have quite that many, but I actually just did the local install. Not sure why I'm not getting all the same errors. Did you do global?
What version of npm were you running?
This is 8. You think what? 6.5?
npm node is 8.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
I think it's 6 that started the scary warnings, right?
Oh, yeah. Running 5.3.
Running the latest now.
Yep.
It's a little scary.
Yes, and because I'm using the default in this environment,
But as a learner, don't worry about it.
yes.
More years.
Yep. So as long as it's just a warn and you're a learner, don't worry about it. The errors will actually stop things. The warn are, hey, you might think about this at some point down the line. Okay? Come on. Okay. By and large, I encourage people to install locally as much as humanly possible. If you don't need access to it everywhere on your system, install it locally. Okay? If you're going to use it lots and lots of times in lots of different packages, for example, Yarn, where you would be using it in many different packages, it makes more sense to install it globally instead of having it in lots of different directories on the same program, lots of different directories on your machine.
I installed the Learn You Node, and now it's looking for Node, but I have Node.js installed in that same path, but it's Node.js. You would think that they would match up.
So,
Like which Node.js?
Yep. Okay. Show me where you ran the install for Learn You Node.
I ran it right here. I went sudo.
And you shouldn't have to use sudo.
Well, I did.
Okay.
npm install learn you. Oh, that was probably because I should have done that.
Node.js, but you do want it global.
I did do that.
Okay.
And but like I said, I don't have Node on there. It's Node.js. I guess I could go in there and make a link to Node.js. Would that work? Or
Yeah, so when that's done, just run learn you node directly from the command line. Don't type anything else, just type learn you node.
I did that. Watch this.
Okay.
Learn you node. See?
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm thinking I need
Yeah,
to link it to
yeah,
it. So
yeah.
I'll go and do that.
Okay. I would encourage just for this, just set up a Code Anywhere account and do it there instead of worrying about connecting it on your local machine. Okay. Any other challenges? Okay. So Learn You Node is one of several self-paced workshoppers. Not my favorite word in the world, but that's what they call them, workshoppers, available at Node School.io that are geared toward teaching people the basics of Node and the related ecosystem. We are not going to make it through the Learn You Node module tonight. I'm going to encourage you to finish the Learn You Node module and then check out the other workshoppers that are available. In the meantime, once you have your workshopper installed, once you have this workshopper installed, you run it literally just by running learn you node at the command line. So learn you node. And there's our pretty blue menu. That make sense? Everybody golden. So is there anybody that's trying to follow along, except for this gentleman up front, who is not caught up at this point? Everybody who wants to code along is up and running. Yes? No? Few thumbs up. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and do this first one. And I'm going to do that simply by hitting Enter. And I am now going to switch my layout to the two columns. And I'm going to close that side. I'm going to move over here. Okay. Move you over here. So I now have two terminals off to the right. I'm going to create a new file off to the left. And so how do we actually complete one of these Learn You Node exercises? Well, it gives us the title for this particular program, the Learn You Node. It then tells us that this challenge is a Hello World exercise. It's 1 of 13. And this particular challenge, we are supposed to write a program that prints the text Hello World to the console, also known as standard out in the back-end world. You won't often see that on the front end. And it's kind enough to give us these hints. And so the first hint that it gives us is to make a Node program. We create a new file with a JavaScript extension, and we start writing JavaScript. So I have my new file over here. I am going to go ahead and save this in my project. I'm going to call it 01 dash, I think it's Hello World. Ooh, that's a new one. 01, Hello World. And I'm going to give it that JS extension. Pretty simple. To execute our program, we run it from with the node command simply by running node and the file name. Now, this goes back to you need to be in the same directory that the file is to run it like this. So I'm going to bounce over to my other terminal. I'm going to run node 01, and I'm not going to type the rest of that name. I'm going to hit tab, and the command line will fill that out for me. And then I'm going to hit enter, and our program runs. Whoop! We've run our first Node program. That was really exciting, wasn't it? So we want to make it a little bit more exciting. So you can write to the console using a very familiar, if you're familiar with JavaScript, console log. So I'm just going to copy this example right here. I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to save my file, bounce back over to my other terminal, and I'm going to run this and text. Shoot. What's that? You will not, and it is actually encouraged by the Node, the ECMAScript community at this point. I have to admit, I'm moderately old school. I hate semicolons, so yes. What's that? I'm old school and I insist on it. Yeah. Yeah, there was a phase there where they weren't cool, and that's where I'm from. Okay, so we have something printing out to our console. How do we proceed with this particular challenge? Well, we're supposed to run learn you node, verify, and then our program name. So I'm going to hop over here, learn you node, verify, 01, hello world. And I do that, and, well, this doesn't look very promising. So it tells me that what it actually saw was text, and what it expected was, in all caps, hello world. And it then proceeds to tell me that I failed, because I didn't get it right. So somebody tell me how I can come over here and fix this.
Add a semicolon.
So there it goes again, and we still have a fail.
Change the text.
2. And there we go. So if we look at it again, it actually still shows us our actual and our expected. It gives me a happy little green check mark. It tells me that we passed. It also gives an official solution to how they think you should solve this problem. In this case, there's not a lot of variety. You'll notice that we have a semicolon and they do not. And I would argue that the semicolon is better practice, even if I don't use them. So the official solution is not always the best solution. And that's kind of an important thing as you're working through this as a learner. Just because your solution is different than somebody else's solution, it does not mean that your solution is a bad solution. It just means that it is different. It proceeds to tell me that we have 12 challenges left, and we can type learn you node to show the menu. I'm going to actually bounce over here. I don't know why I didn't do this before. Run this again. So there's our menu. And you'll notice now that to the right of my hello world, I have completed. Woot! So we're going to go ahead and step into baby steps. We're going to do the same thing. So baby steps. We are going to write a program that accepts one or more numbers as command line arguments. And you'll notice that I kind of harped on the command line and how you pass parameters to the command line. This kind of comes into play here. Shoot.
I just noticed in the first example, they showed you the console log text.
Yes.
Quotes, and then their solution is single quotes.
Yes.
On that?
So all of this is open source. So if you see something like that, feel free to make contributions. And yes, that is inconsistent, and you should be more consistent with your code. I tend to go single quotes, but I copied theirs. Did I hear somebody else? No. Okay. So our challenge is to write a program that accepts one or more numbers as command line arguments and prints those. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, first off, we're going to create our new file. So here's my new file. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Anybody got a guess as to what I'm going to name this? I'm so creative, I know. Purple People Eater is the extent of my creativity here. That's not quite true. So we want to take these command line arguments. It tells us to get started. We can actually output the parameters that come in from our command line with console log process argv. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to bounce over. I'm going to run node 02. We're going to run that. And you'll notice that I get back an array. And the first thing on that array is a very long path that ends in node. And the second entry in the array is a very long path that ends in 02 baby steps. And if you look at what I sent in on the command line, you'll notice that I have node 02 baby steps. Go figure. So it literally has said, here's the first thing on the command line, here's the second thing on the command line. And if I give it multiple things, what's going to happen? Anybody want to take a guess? So I'm passing it 2121, and there's our array. We have node first, we have our file second, and then we have the parameters that I sent through it to it third and fourth. That kind of makes sense? Okay. Now, this is really exciting stuff. For those of you who this seems boring because you've already been there and done that, just remember the excitement that you felt the first time you did these things. So back to our challenge. So our challenge is to take these values and print out the sum of them. I'm going to move us kind of quickly because I want to make it a little bit further here. So I am going to I'll move you over here so we can kind of see this. So const command file num r equals process arg v semicolon for you. Const sum equals nums boom nums reduce. And it doesn't like sum, and I don't know why. And I have not used it in this program before, so it should not be screaming at me, but it does. And what's that? It is not a keyword. My guess is they've used it somewhere in this environment, and so it's being picked up by some type of linter, most likely. Actually, I'm going to do this.
Notice greedy. It doesn't want some, it wants all.
It wants, yes. And 0. And why are you screaming? Function plus. That makes it happier. Console, info, sum, num, r. Okay. So we're going to look at the slides in a second. I've used a variety of different things that are more recent JavaScript. I've got a spread, or a destructuring argument, actually. I've got a fat arrow in here. I've got a couple fat arrows in here. I've got a reduce. For right now, I just want to see if this works for us. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to bounce over. And we're going to go ahead and test this. So learn, node, verify, and O2 baby steps. Does anybody think this is going to pass?
No.
Why not?
Because you're using construct instead of var.
Using construct instead of var? Const.
Const, that's what I mean. Const is short for construct.
No, it is actually constant.
Const, oh, yeah.
Yes,
right.
yes.
My bad.
Anybody else? What's that? It's not going to work. Okay. I'm going to do it over here. So I'm going to paste that. My 0 should be what? What was parentheses? Which line? Which line number? He's looking at 6. Okay. Yes. So what I've got is reduce takes two different parameters. The first parameter is a callback function. That's this fat arrow function right here. The second parameter it takes is the starting value for the reduction. So this 0 is the initial value of my reduction here. Okay.
So the constant represents the formula, not necessarily the values in the formula.
Yes. And in this case, const is actually the function sum. I call it right down here. Okay. So I got a fail. So if we look at our results, where does nums come from? Almost. So where does nums come from? So this nums right here, I can actually wrap it in parens. This is a single parameter that I'm passing into my fat arrow function. I could name that whatever I want it to. I could call it nums. I could call it numbers. I could call it n. I could call it x. I could call it foobar, doesn't matter. That's my name. What needs to be consistent, because this is the array that I'm working on, is it needs to be the same as the value right here in front of our dot reduce. So as long as I change those two in concert, life is still golden.
Num array gets passed in place of the nums. Is that right?
Yes. So I am passing, I get num r from this value right here, and I'm passing that into our sum function at that point. Cool. Okay. So back to our actual versus our expected. Not now, not now. We expected 212 from whatever parameters they sent in, and we got 0889034. Anybody got any ideas what might be going on? Strings. So if we look back at our very nice hints down here, we will see that it mentions loops, which there's a more learner-friendly way to do this with loops. I went with a more advanced way to do it. But it mentions that we get everything back as strings, and that we need to either convert it with a number, or we need to convert it with this plus sign. I'm going to throw out there, because I'm trying to be a little bit different, parse int. So that's going to convert whatever comes in as an integer. All of these are coming in as integers. I happen to know that. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to bounce back. We're going to run this command again, and boom shakalaka. We have lots of greenness, which is awesome, which is what we're looking for. And it gives us the example, or the best practices solution that they currently have, which uses vars and a for loop. And a couple other things. So I obviously did it in a very different way. We do have time, yay. Just because that's the solution they came up with doesn't mean that is the one and only solution. I'm going to go back over here real quick. That's really bright, wow. The O1 hello world, that was my solution. I am going to do something, because I just realized. Boom, disable till sunrise. That will make that even brighter. Yay. I do have some documentation on the console log. This is not your normal documentation on console log. This is actually the Node documentation on console log. So MDN is a common one for stuff in the browser. You want to hit Node for Node documentation. Should be a big surprise, right? Okay, so baby steps. Some of the things that I did very differently than their solution, I used a destructuring assignment to grab our number array. I actually used process arg the same way. That's a link to the Node documentation. I used arrow functions in a couple of different places, so that's documentation on that. Huge fan of map, reduce, filter. So there's a little bit of information there. If you don't know loops, learn loops first, then come back and revisit this. And then console info, because you can actually use console info in place of console log. And the test pass is just dandy.
What's the difference between info and log?
They are supposed to be exactly the same. I have actually found a handful of places where console info works that console log doesn't work. So I've started defaulting to info.
So learn loops before Node.
Yes. Okay. Yep. If you don't understand a basic for loop, stop, go learn a basic for loop.
That explains why before Node, you said, or before the reduce?
Before reduce, yes.
Yeah. Before reduce, not before Node. Learn Node whenever you want.
Yes.
Explain what you're doing with reduction and correction.
Yes. So what's happening is, so nums reduce takes these two parameters. One is the function, one is our starting reduction. Okay. So the 0 is the starting point for whatever the first parameter is here. I've named it reduction. You can call it R, you can call it sum, you can call it whatever you want to. Again, it's your name, but we are going to assign whatever this value is to this variable here. Each time we go through this reduce function, we're going to take the next element in this numbers array, and we're going to put it in this current parameter, and we're going to take whatever the current value is for our sum, our reduction, whatever it is that you are doing. If you're doing multiplication, you can do, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be addition. It will pass those through to your function. So in this case, I'm taking whatever my reduction is. So the first time that I hit this, it's 0, because that's what I set down here.
So it's 0 get assigned to reduction, you said?
Yes, the very first time. So the first time we come through here, reduction equals 0. And the first number in our array, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3 just for ease of example. So if 1 is our first element, current will equal 1 the first time we go through here. So I'm saying add 0 to the integer value of the string 1.
Where did that come from? The command line?
Yes. So I took all of the parameters that were passed through to to process argv. I took everything except for, or I took all of the things except for the first and second, which are my program name, the node, and the program name, right? So we're imagining we pass through the numbers 1, number 2, number 3.
How did I know to start with the third element then?
So that's actually back to this destructuring. So what I've done is I've said, take this,
Yes.
assign the very first thing to the variable command, the second thing to the variable file, and everything else that comes after that to a number array. Okay? So my number array has 3 entries in it. First time we go through number 1, and our reduction is 0. I said return whatever the sum of those 2 things are. So the next time I come through, my reduction is the sum from the previous one, because that's the way I write this program. So the next time I come through, it's 1. My current value is going to be 2, because that's the second entry in my array. So I add 1 plus 2, I get 3. So my reduction, my third loop through, is 3. My third parameter was 3, so we would get back 6.
So how did you get 100?
For their tests, they're sending in numbers. I don't have any control over it, so it's whatever numbers they sent through.
And 0 can be changed to 1 to yada yada.
Yes. Yep.
Like if you wanted to start with like 10.
Yep.
For some reason.
Yeah, if for some reason, the conference, let's say we have 5 organizers, so we just automatically want to start selling at ticket number 6. I could have, instead of a 0 there, a 5, and the first time we went through the iteration, we would start at 6. So
How do you know to do reduction in current, though? Or where does that come from?
those. Well, it's not part of the lesson, but it's one of those things I know I struggled with. They literally are just parameter names that I named. I could call it X and Y if I wanted to.
Okay, well, then how do you know to use those 2 parameters?
So that is understanding what reduce does, and that is check out that documentation and play with it a lot. Nope. Okay. We're not going to make it through another one, but I'm going to go ahead and at least get us started on it. Fix you, so you're going to work, and I'm going to run learn you Node again. One of the things that Node can do that you can't do in your browser, you can't depend on being able to do in your browser, is input-output. So that's one of the early ones, because everything else that we've done up to this point has been pretty standard JavaScript. This first one, it wants us to, using synchronous methods, take a file in and count the number of new lines. And new lines can be represented with your \n, and we're actually going to output the number for that. And so, save you, close you, habits. new file, save, you go away. And 03 sync IO.js. Okay, so we have our file. And the first thing it tells us is that we're going to need to require an FS. Well, what's an FS? File system. So I'm going to copy you. I'm going to paste you, or not. Let's see if I can copy today. There you go. And the var is going to bother me beyond belief, so I'm going to fix that because I live without semicolons, but I can't live with vars. If you read through this, what I'm typing is going to make a little bit more sense. I am going to go make that big again. Const. So the first thing that I want is I want to be able to grab the file name that's passed in. This should look very familiar at this point. argv. It is a parameter in there. The way that Node handles files, it actually has a thing called a buffer. File buffer. So I'm going to have a variable called my file buffer, and I'm going to use that file system. It has a read file sync method on it. I'm not sure why that didn't come up. And I'm going to pass it the file name. Thank you. Const. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out what the contents of my file buffer are. I'm going to translate it from buffer to something that we can use. And that one's actually pretty simple. So I'm going to do file buffer to string. And before I go too far, so there's a little bit of discussion about the buffer objects here. It mentions that you're going to use a toString. One way to do it is to use a toString. So I'm keeping with the way that they're doing it here. And there are links in their documentation I strongly recommend. And then we're going to go back to some pretty standard JavaScript at this point. Lines in file. So this is actually going to break the file contents up into individual sentences, basically, wherever there's a new line. So I'm going to take our file contents. And anybody got any idea what I'm going to do here? Split. And what am I going to split on? New line, because we're trying to measure those new lines. And real quick, just to give you an idea of what we've got coming out at this point, and you can do a console log on every single one of these steps the way I've got it set up. You won't be able to do that with examples that follow. So I'm going to go ahead and console log that out. Save that. And when you're working through this, remember it provided the numbers for our last program. In this case, it has multiple different text files that it's going to pull from. So instead of verify, you can do a run. So I'm going to bounce over here. I'm going to do learn you run. Oh, learn you node. Come on, maybe. Learn you node. And I'm going to do a run instead of a verify. And I'm going to pass it my file 03. We're going to run that. Bum, bum, bum. And so each one of these indentions right here represent a different paragraph where there's a line break at the end of it. You can see the comma for the array here and here. So basically, I just have an array of, and I said sentences earlier, I meant paragraphs. So I have an array of paragraphs at the moment. So now I'm going to convert that over to a count. So new line count equals lines in file. Anybody got an idea what property I might use? Length. So this is, again, standard JavaScript. Anybody have any idea what problem I might run into at this point? So the way they've got this structured, they're going to send in text. So I'm not going to get a null. But that's something as you go further, that's a good thing to be paying attention to. Anybody else? Why -1? Yeah, because I split it. So essentially what's happening is every time there was a new line, it broke it off. So if I had 2 sentences or 2 paragraphs, there was one new line that broke from the first paragraph to the second paragraph, but there wasn't a new line at the end of the second paragraph. So my array has 2 entries in it, but there was only one new line. Kind of make sense? Kind of, sort of.
Why would you use -1, I guess? So what you're saying is we're not looking for the number of lines, we're looking for the number of line breaks.
Correct. Correct. So if I come in here and I do new line count, and I save that, learn node verify 03, and we run that, and despite random sentences, they had 36 new lines in the sample they sent in. If I run it again, it will have a different number because, well, we'll probably have a different number. So the second time we had 16. So it's sending in random data each time, so you can't hard code it in there. Cool?
So this is an example again. You're not running in a browser, you're just running a script.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. All of this is local. The Learn You node, this particular one really does cover the big things that you should be familiar with in Node as you go through. So that was asynchronous. Most of what you'll do in Node will be asynchronous. This one is pretty challenging. There's actually a really good reading. I wish it had been available when I had gone through the very first time on how to do the asynchronous. It's kind of a lengthy one. Lists, modules are kind of important. The way Node handles modules is different than the way ES6 handles modules, so something to be aware of. HTTP, which that is really the thing most people equate Node with, particularly when they're new. So HTTP is really, really super important. You'll notice that about half of what's up there is HTTP related. So you can't spend enough time there. And going back to your Express question, so Express is a module that helps abstract away a lot of the things that the HTTP does, but it is better to understand what's going on under the hood before you go using a shortcut like Express. But once you understand it, Express is a great tool. Cool? So that was a really novice level. Hopefully I didn't bore most of you too much. And for those of you who are new, hopefully I didn't go too far over your head. I did move quickly. I tried to move a little bit more slowly most of the time, but I wanted to get pretty far into this. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me after this. Ask your neighbor, strike up a conversation. I think food is here. I think I saw some signs of that. So go grab food, and we'll have React context after this.